Hello, 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 how's it going? It's me, Chris. Rebecca is ill tonight. She's not feeling very well, so she is in bed listening to Coraline, one of her favourite stories. She loves the films. Hasn't read the book, I don't think, so she's listening to that audiobook in bed, hopefully feeling a little bit better. I've put our little girl to bed, and now it's time to do the podcast. So you might have seen from Instagram, while I was doing this, I've done myself a nifty little setup where I have got some soundproof panels and I've put them on one of the walls. And what I'm hoping to do is that when me and Becca record next together, we can sit facing each other with a green screen behind Becca, which is kind of absorbent that I got from a Specsavers that was shutting down. And then with me having the panels behind me, so it, hopefully it just improves the quality overall. It's hopefully, it's just these little things to do. I posted a little picture on Instagram, so you would have seen on my story. But yeah, okay, right. This episode's a little bit late, mainly because I did the Great North Run. Finally got there on Sunday. Did 13.1 miles. Absolutely fucking killed me off. But I raised £500 for charity, which I cannot believe that it all happened. I can't believe that all that training paid off. There was the 4 weeks over the summer where my life just went fucking tits up. I was just too busy. But then to get back on track and actually finish the half marathon, and that was my goal, was to finish it, and I did. I couldn't actually believe it, but I was in no state Sunday or Monday. I'm recording this Tuesday night. Could not walk afterwards. It was a struggle. Like, I limped to get my medal. Then the traffic was so bad that a guy who'd finished like an hour before me gave me a lift home because he'd been sat in the car park with his wife for like 2 hours by that point. So it took us 4 hours to get out of the car park and then get back home in a journey that normally takes 25-30 minutes. South Shields was bouncing. Aye. So yes, thank you to everybody who donated. There was even somebody who donated after I'd finished. They donated £100, which I was gobsmacked at, which got me to the stretched goal of £500. So whoever you are, you were anonymous. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Yeah, so I'm a little bit disappointed because I would have loved to have Becca here for this one tonight, but I couldn't delay. Like, we have not had the best schedule over this past summer, so I needed to get the episode in because there's a lot of people who notice when we don't have the episodes, and frankly, I'm sick of people who message me like half an hour after I normally release an episode. Like, so I started releasing it on a Monday. And they'll be like, "Oh, I was going to work and I couldn't listen to the podcast. Are you okay?" And they never, they might think, "Am I okay?" But it's a very gentle reminder to put out that fucking content so I can consume it. I'm very toasty here in my little soundproof booth. I hope that it comes across in the audio quality. I would like it to do. But I digest. Right, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to start a mini-series on magic in Middle-earth. Now, originally this episode, as some of you will have spoken, because I talk to people all throughout the process, and I did say the next episode's going to be about magic, and that was what I was always envisioned, was that the next episode was going to be about magic. And lo and behold, as I started to research it, you very quickly realise there's too much. There's too much here to do. This can't be one episode. It's the same as Rohan. I thought Rohan was going to be like 2 parts, turned into a whole series, a 4-part series, right? Smash or Pass, fantastic game. That had to be the palate cleanser because the Druidan took a lot out of me. The Druidan, just to be one episode, was tough, but that was because that originally was going to be the other types of humans in Tolkien's work. Like, so we'd covered hobbits and we'd covered Rohan, and I was going to cover all of the subsections together, like Druidan, the Easterlings, the Southrons, the the Inuit type people who lived in the far north. But as usual, it became too much, and you realise, like, even the things that don't have much about them still have too much a lot of the time to take them as a group of things together. So this is going to be a mini-series, and the mini-series is going to be magic. Now, I don't know how many episodes it's going to be, but I'm going to cover the main types of magic in Middle-earth. Now, of course, there's that Galadriel quote where she says, like, you know, like, oh, you may call it magic, Sam, but me, love, I just call it what I do. Or she said something to that effect. I know it was very close to what I've just said. But magic is our understanding of magic, our fantasy sensibilities of magic is so I'm just going to use the word magic. Yes, it means the elvish arts. Yes, it means the dwarven art. It means all of the wonderful things that Tolkien meant. But we're still talking about what we understand as magic. And it's like trying to catch mist. It is like trying to hold fog in your hands, trying to pin down all of the magic in Middle-earth, because fundamentally magic is kind of infused into the world, and it would be with a world that was created by God, big G God, like a God, Eru Iluvatar, and then shaped. The universe was created by Eru, and then the Arda was shaped by the Valar. That, of course, like there's magic, but there's miracles as well. There's miraculous magic, which Tolkien does make a big distinction about. So, today we're going to talk about necromancy, which I thought was one that it was just no particular area to start in, but I just thought it was a good one to start with. Now we're going to talk about necromancy, but really deeply tied into that is the concept of evil elves. Not like Feanor might be evil, because even though he was a bit of a bastard, fundamentally he wasn't evil. I'm going to talk about elves that we could possibly categorise as properly evil based on some of the things Tolkien writes about, and he does call them out. Doesn't call them out by name. There's no named elves who are purely evil, except, I mean, arguably Maeglin and Eol, probably. But there are elves who would demonstrate the characteristics of being evil spirits, which is necromancy. So like I said, I'm going to use the word magic a lot, even though, specifically denied by characters in the books, blah, 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 blah. So Tolkien had many forms of magic, like I've said. And these were often attributed by their performers as natural arts. And almost all of the major races had some aspect or some abilities that would be considered magical. So we'll go through them one by one in the next few episodes. So expect an episode on, like, Elvish magic, Valarin, the magic of the Valar, the magic of the Maiar, Gandalf's magic, that type of stuff, right? So I'll start with a little bit about necromancy in our world, because it sent me on a deep dive, and would you believe it, listeners of this podcast, that I went back to Christianity, and there was quite a bit in Christianity there. I found some quite surprising stuff, and there's some stuff I'd be very keen to get your opinions on, because the research I found was very interesting, but I could see that it being quite heavily disputed, I think, depending on your viewpoint, bordering on kind of like sacrilegious, but we'll see. But yeah, the whole point is this is going to be necromancy. I'm going to split all the magic up because it was just too much. It was too big. It was too thick. It was too throbbing. It was too creamy for me to take in all at once. I just couldn't keep hold of it. I tried to use both hands, and the magic just throbbed right out of my hands and slapped me in the face. So, with Tolkien, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about magic. We're going to talk about magic versus miraculous acts. There will be episodes where we talk about miraculous acts and under the guise of magic, but I'm strictly talking about magic here. Although for a lot of us, like that will be a non-issue, right? So, like, a lot of people, I dare say, unless you were a Christian of a certain persuasion, you'd probably see miracles. Sound like fucking Cleveland Brown. Miracles. You'd probably see miracles as divine magic, just magic coming from God, right? However, some aspects of Christianity seem to view magic that is not miracle as evil by default. Like, if it doesn't come from God, it's evil. And I found a lot of Bible verses, and in particular, we're talking about necromancy today, which is about the dead. evil spirits, demons, that type of stuff, right? Which I'll go into some of the distinctions. But a lot of the Bible verses talk about witchcraft, and they talk about communing with the dead. So there's a lot in the Bible that would apply to our modern understanding of necromancy. Well, no, it wouldn't actually. Sorry, no, it would apply to the classical understanding of necromancy, which is communing with the dead. But it wouldn't really truck a lot with our modern understanding of necromancy. And I'm going to go into why that is, because it changed around the Middle Ages. Necromancy went under a bit of a facelift, had a bit of an identity crisis. And what we now know as necromancy, like raising the dead, commanding demons, etc., that's not traditionally what necromancy was. But let's go through some Bible verses first, and this will set us up for the rest of the series, because we know that Tolkien, is a very religious man. So let's have a look at what some of the Bible verses were about witchcraft and magic in general, and in particular pay attention to the bits about spirits and communing with the dead. So there is 2 Chronicles 33:6. He sacrificed his children in the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced divination and witchcraft, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. Leviticus 19:31. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 26. I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute themselves by following them, and I will cut them off from their people. Revelation 21:8. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulphur. This is the second death. Galatians 5:19-21. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So there's more to go on, but I think the point stands that communing with the dead and magic and witchcraft and what have you is not really looked upon favourably in the Bible. Which is interesting, because I don't know what it's like for the rest of the world, but a big thing in the north of England, or maybe England in general, it's quite a working class kind of pastime to go and visit spiritualists and people who give messages from beyond the grave. And if there's any Americans, I know there's a lot of Americans, I don't know why I said that, Americans, North Americans, who haven't heard of a person called Clinton Baptiste. He is a clairvoyant medium psychic, he calls himself, but he's a comedy character. Listen to some of his stuff. It's fucking hilarious the way that he talks to people who've passed on. And there's a very famous one from a show called Phoenix Nights, which is where the character originated, which was a comedy show. And he's got all of these people in a pub. And that's what they used to that's what they do, is people will pay $5 to go and see a medium or a spiritualist. And they'll go and sit in, that passion over Derek Acora, and you'll have seen the shows where they get to, and they say, I've got a message for so and so. So Clinton Baptiste has got everybody in this nightclub, and they're all there, and he's saying, I'm getting the word nonce. He looks at this bloke, and he's saying, I'm getting the word nonce. He's like, I just pass on the messages, and I think that's probably my favourite interpretation. And he's even got a podcast, actually. The comedy character has got a podcast. It's fucking hilarious. But yeah, it's quite a working class pastime to kind of commune with the dead. And I think that's where Ouija boards started as well, was that in the Victorian times, it started as a parlour game. And that's where seances and what have you, they were quite common. Which is, it's odd, considering that, the Bible seems so against it. Which is, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, basically, God was the dead are my realm. You fucking stay away, or break your kneecaps. So, which brings us to necromancy. And what is necromancy? So, Wikipedia summarizes necromancy as the practice of magic involving communication with the dead by summoning their spirits as apparitions or visions for the purpose of divination, imparting the means to foretell future events and discover hidden knowledge. Sometimes categorized under death magic, the term is occasionally also used in a more general sense to refer to black magic or witchcraft as a whole, which we've just seen with the Bible. So in our world, the term necromancy is from the Latin necromantia, which is from the Greek necromanteia, which means divination through a dead body, the parts of the word being necros, dead body, and manteia, divination. It first appeared in the 3rd century AD in the writings of a dude called Origen of Alexandria, a Christian scholar. So, it is said that the term came from the ancient Greek practice of nekia, Nekyia, in which spirits or ghosts were summoned and questioned about the future. Hence the divination bit, right? So that already sounds a bit different to how I thought of necromancy coming into this episode. It sounds more like a seance, like you're communing with the spirits. It's not so much the necromancy we understand. But interestingly, the term nekia also became popular to describe talking to ghosts, but it was also used to describe... Sorry, the term nekia was used to describe talking to ghosts, but it was also used to describe taking actual physical journeys in ancient Greek and ancient Roman, in the ancient world, taking actual journeys to the underworld. However, if we were to be pedantic, the correct term for actually visiting the underworld was called katabasis, which means go down, or katabasis, whatever. So a nekia is summoning or invoking a spirit to ask questions about the future. A katabasis is to actually physically go to the underworld, like the tale of Persephone in the Greek myths about why she spent 6 months above the ground and 6 months in the underworld, and that's why the seasons change and what have you. So yeah, just thanks to the Greeks, I guess, because the necromancy stuff for me is fucking interesting. Like, I could not believe some of the stuff I learned doing this. So the Greeks, though, they took necromancy as like the classical definition very seriously. There were entire sites dedicated to speaking with the dead. Now there was a city called Heracles Pontica, which was settled solely because the people of the Greek city-state of Megara thought that a nearby cave was one of the entrances to the underworld. That city is now the site of a city in Turkey called Karadeniz Eregli, which, if I've got any Turkish people, or anyone who's been there, if you could tell me the proper pronunciation, I'd thank you for it. Fuck me. But this is one for the D&D nerds, because there was also oracles of the dead to be found at a place called Avernus, which was an ancient volcanic crater in Italy. So that's why we get, the descent into Avernus in D&D, that adventure, is because it was a site of one of the oracles of the dead, which was pretty metal to be in a fucking volcanic crater. So, moving on to what we'd understand as necromancy, which is the idea of raising the dead, controlling demons, etc. And this is really fucked up, and this is the bit where this might be considered a bit controversial, because the act, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So the act of controlling demons, raising the dead, that is actually, on paper, that's a lot closer to Middle Ages Christian exorcism. Like, sorry, not even just Christian, but exorcism in general. Like, being an exorcist involved controlling spirits more than the ancient necromancy did it. That was asking them things. That this one's making them do shit. So rituals were regularly performed where demons were commanded, and evil spirits as well. So demons and evil spirits were commanded by exorcists. And if you've ever been baptized as a Catholic, then you've had a minor exorcism done on you. Because in most Catholic baptisms, they say something along the lines of, Almighty and ever-living God, you sent your only Son into the world to cast out the power of Satan, spirit of evil, to rescue man from the kingdom of darkness and bring him into the splendor of your kingdom of light. We pray for this child, and this bit, set him or her free from original sin, make him or her a temple of your glory, and send your Holy Spirit to dwell with him. We ask through Christ our Lord. So they're invoking the power of God to compel any evil to be gone from you, which is just like, wow. So priests and exorcists have power over demons to compel them to do things based on Christ's authority. And the interesting thing is that in the Middle Ages, and I'm not sure what it's like now, but priests didn't even need to be a good person. You didn't need to be a particularly moral person. You didn't need to be a pious. Well, if you were a priest, you were generally pious. But like an exorcist didn't need to be like a saint. Like they were still invoking Christ's power to compel demons and evil spirits to do things. So they could also compel demons to leave a person, which you've seen like with The Exorcist, or horror films. Like we all know, it's like the power of Christ compels you. But they could also compel them to do things like, like they try and find out their names. And they could compel the demon to tell their name by invoking God's authority and Christ's authority. So then it's not that far of a jump that if you can compel them to tell you things, if you can compel them to do things, that's controlling a spirit, that's controlling a demon. Like it doesn't matter how you get there, you're still controlling a demon. And necromancy, in fact, like a lot of rituals invoked Christ-like figures and stuff like a lot of, which I'll get into in a little bit, where the lines become really blurred, because a lot of what we understand now as necromancy, and like they say it's evil and what have you, a lot of it was like it invoked Christian figures, which is like fucking crazy. But if you could compel a demon to leave a body, you could compel a demon to tell you its name. What's the jump then to doing other things like compelling it to attack your enemies, compelling it to take you to where buried treasure is, which for some reason is very popular in like our real world study of magic, like quote unquote real world magic. But when you look at the conception of necromancy as a historical one, and you look at a Christian, if you look at an exorcist, probably our modern understanding of necromancy is that controlling the dead and controlling like evil spirits and that. Jesus would probably be the most famous necromancer. And again, I urge you not to do away with like you might come from a place where you intrinsically link necromancy with evil, but if you take it on the concept that we understand it of controlling evil spirits, then Jesus would be the boss of them. Like he compelled demons a lot of the time to just get the fuck out. Like being an exorcist used to be a day job. So like the Jews, a lot of ancient Jews were exorcists, and it got fucking silly. Like I'll come on to it. So why do we understand them as necromancers now, and why they're not still exorcists? And it's because people fucked it up. That people ruined it for everyone else, right? So when you start looking into the esoteric aspect of magic belief in our world, rites of necromancy and summon compel spirits, etc., they did invoke angels and Christian saints and figures like that for protection. So what we would call necromancers now, back few hundred to 1,000, 2,000 years ago, pretty hardcore Christians, right? So the last thing is that I mentioned people ruined it, right? So they skirted the lines. Practitioners of exorcism up to the Middle Ages, they skirted the lines and extended exorcism. They kept extending it, right? They kept adding things. And that's what ruined it, to the point where the church took notice and banned it. And that's why we understand necromancy as like evil and what have you. Because what they do, for example, right, is that people would produce exorcisms for bread and cheese, right? They would have rituals that you could do to purify your bread and cheese, and they were like, oh well, if you can call on the power of God to get the evil spirits and demons out of your dad, then you can do it for bread and cheese, because people used to think bread and cheese was going bad. Then they'd take it a little bit further. You'd now have rituals and exorcisms for cows that stop producing milk. And this is over a long time frame, by the way, right? And there's a lot of people doing it. It's widespread in like Europe. So you'd have rituals and exorcisms for cows that stop producing milk. So, you know, you're saying, I command the demons to leave my dad. Then you could say, oh, well, now I command the demons to leave my bread and cheese. Now I command the demons to leave my cow. And you still, you know, it's just, you're inching and inching and inching. And it's going further away from orthodoxy, right? It's going further away from sanctioned church activity. So then they started to do more things. Like, people would add other things. So now you could have exorcisms to produce holy water. You could have rituals and exorcisms to purge water of unclean spirits. Then you could have rituals to produce amulets that would protect you from harm, that would make you lucky, that would make you do stuff. Then they'd add on to that, and they'd start having exorcists for things that weren't traditionally thought of as evil spirits, like elves, like little fae creatures, tricksters, like not quite evil, not even really paid much attention to, but now you're starting to drag in like the fae creatures into it, right? Then they'd start changing the rituals slightly, right? So it's all this, like, it's over a very long time frame, so it's bit by bit by bit. They'd start invoking angels in their rituals, and they'd start with the well-known ones like Michael, Raphael, Donatello, Leonardo, you know, like the Splinter. Like, they'd start invoking those angels, but then they'd start invoking names that nobody was quite sure if they were angels, or were they perhaps fallen angels, or were they perhaps something else entirely? Were they, you know, were they demons, fallen angels? Were they demons? Were they other things entirely? Then they still kept going, like it was a widespread problem throughout Europe, right? Then they'd start adding things to the rituals that weren't Greek, that weren't Latin, that they were just words that didn't seem to mean anything, but they sounded a bit weird. And they started to sound a little bit like magical incantations. Now, knowing what we know from the beginning of the episode about the Bible, the church at this point realized that something had fucked up. That what used to be a sanctioned activity was now widespread. People were doing their own things under the guise of exorcism, calling it like fucking all sorts of stuff. And so they banned it. And then by the time we get to the Middle Ages, we get to a work that's quite famous, and so now we know that people have ruined exorcism, and it's not viewed well by like the pious people, by the really hardcore religious, because it was a widespread quote unquote exorcists had skirted the line and moved into actual esoteric magic. So it got to the point where the Malleus Maleficarum, which is probably the best known work on witchcraft ever made, described exorcists of the Middle Ages as sinners and no better than witches. And that was quite serious. So what the Malleus Maleficarum did was it gave pure exorcisms. It's like, right, fucking scrap everything that's come before. Here is what an actual exorcism looks like. And it was one of the first times that the exorcism practice was started to be codified, but anyway, sorry, I realise I've rambled for nearly half an hour about actual necromancy, and we want to get on to Tolkien, because this is a Tolkien podcast, and I'm sorry about I'd be here for hours. So, the point being, like, going forward, is that a lot of the time, magic in Tolkien's work can be kind of frowned upon, because it can be used as shorthand for things that the Bible doesn't agree with. And I think I'd be fairly safe in saying that in Tolkien, his views on magic and miracles seems to stand broadly with what we've seen from the Bible. Is that, like, you know, the black magic, there's black spells, there's necromancy, what have you. But anything that the elves do it's not called magic. It's their art, it's their natural art, it's their fae, living in harmony with their body, allowing them to produce beautiful things that to us would seem like magic. Then you've got the hobbits and their abilities being seen as magic by other people, you know, etc., etc. But then the actual things that, like, Gandalf can do are miracles. It's miraculous. So let's talk about necromancy in Tolkien. And we're going to talk a bit more. Firstly, we're going to talk about evil spirits, because the Tolkien definition of necromancy is the subjugation and controlling of evil spirits. So, Sauron is known as the necromancer, and who apparently, because we're going to come on to this, it's quite contentious, apparently communes and controls spirits. The Barrow-wight are spirits that have not passed on and are evil, essentially. We know that they denied, we know that they have denied the call of Mandos, right? And they linger. So let's look at some of the most notable evil spirits. And there's some things in this episode that I'm going to drop in that they don't quite fit anywhere else in the Legendarium. But so probably the biggest and baddest evil spirit is Morgoth. Now, what really surprised me is that during the course of researching this episode, I found out that Morgoth was executed by the Valar after the end of War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. And his spirit was exiled from Arda. And as a side note this week, right, so there's Red Moors, who listens to the podcast. She's been watching Rings of Power with her husband, and they've been talking about Ungoliant and the Void and what have you. And we were talking about the Void this week, and I was saying that people confuse like being outside Arda, i.e. outside the planet or the solar system, versus being outside of Ea, outside of the entirety of the universe, into the void. So to me, the void is outside of the universe. It's outside of creation completely. So, even Tolkien says that this is confused by people a lot, and it's used interchangeably because people confuse being outside of the world versus being outside of the universe. But even Morgoth. So when Morgoth was executed, his body was destroyed and his evil spirit fled. And there is some debate as to whether he is outside of the universe completely, i.e. outside of Ea, or he's just outside Arda, which means that he could just be floating around in space, which I think is fucking hilarious. But the actual quote is, "The war was successful, and ruin was limited to the small, if beautiful, region of Beleriand. Morgoth was thus actually made captive in physical form, and in that form taken as a mere criminal to Aman and delivered to Namos Mandos as judge and executioner. He was judged and eventually taken out of the Blessed Realm and executed. That is, killed like one of the incarnates. It was then made plain, though it must have been understood beforehand by Manwë and Namo, that though he had disseminated his power, his evil and possessive and rebellious will, far and wide into the matter of Arda, he had lost direct control of this, and all that he, as a surviving remnant of an integral being, retained as himself, and under control, was the terribly shrunken and reduced spirit that inhabited his self-imposed but now beloved body. When that body was destroyed, he was weak and utterly houseless," and that's not the first time you're going to hear the term houseless today. "And for that time, at a loss and unanchored, he was then thrust out into the void." And then Tolkien says, "That should mean that he was put outside time and space, outside Ea altogether. But if that were so, this would imply a direct intervention of Eru, with or without supplication of the Valar. It may, however, refer inaccurately to the extrusion or flight of his spirit from Arda." So that's what even Tolkien is saying there, that it's not quite clear whether he's outside the universe or he's just out there in space, which is pretty funny. He also points out that we should think of the kingdom of Arda as the solar system rather than just the planet, which I think is pretty cool. So our entire solar system is Arda, according to Tolkien, which is a little bit of astronomy thrown in there. So Morgoth is the first of the evil spirits. Now, I don't think anyone's going to be able to control the evil that Morgoth put into the world with his spirit, but it did cause the taint. And, the taint of other spirits which would be used in necromancy. So then we move on to Sauron. After his defeat, he was consigned to wander the earth as an impotent evil spirit. Ironically, for a renowned necromancer, that he had a similar fate to the spirits he would control. Saruman suffered the same fate. His death, he was denied entry to the west via a wind from Manwë. The Nazgul were attributed to the same fate. Now, arguably, by the time of Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul might be considered evil spirits anyway, because they walk entirely in the unseen world anyway, and they're controlled by Sauron. So I'd be tempted to give him a freebie and say that the Nazgul might be classed as evil spirits, as things that he's doing necromancy with. But I don't know. But during the Siege of Gondor, Gandalf confronts the Witch King of Angmar and declares, "You cannot enter here," said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted. "Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back, fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master." Which I think we covered on the Hell episode I did last Halloween-ish about Angband and Tumnor. And it suggests that they'll be destined to wander the earth forever, cut off from all that is good, denied entry to Mandos and subsequently the Timeless Halls, right? So they're also evil spirits to wander in the abyss. So now we're going to get into a juicy bit of evil spirits, and particularly we're going to talk about evil elves. So Tolkien attributes the creation of evil spirits to the corruption of Morgoth, as mentioned in Morgoth's Ring, which is where a lot of today's stuff has come from. It's been from Morgoth's Ring. So Tolkien wrote, "The shadow upon Arda caused not only misfortune and injury to the body, it could corrupt the mind. And those among the Eldar who were darkened in spirit did unnatural deeds, and were capable of hatred and malice. Not all who died suffered innocently. Moreover, some fearing grief or weariness gave up hope, and turning away from life relinquished their bodies, even though these might have been healed or were indeed unhurt. Few of these latter desired to be reborn, not at least until they had been long in waiting. Some never returned. Of the others, the wrongdoers, many were held long in waiting, and some were not permitted to take up their lives again. For there was, for all the fear of the dead, a time of waiting, in which however so they died, they were corrected, instructed, strengthened, or comforted, according to their need or deserts, and they would, if they would consent to this. But the Fëa, in its nakedness, is obdurate, and remains long in the bondage of its memory of old purpose, especially if these were evil." So what Tolkien's saying is that some elves just were bad to the end. They would not be reformed, would not be reborn, they would not go to Mandos. They were evil, and they would stay evil. So then how do we get to evil spirits that control us? So apart from the Lesser Maiar, which were corrupted to Morgoth's service, how do elves go from being beautiful children of Eru to spooky ghosts? And an extract from Morgoth's Ring tells us a bit more about this. "The Fëa is single, and in the last, impregnable. It cannot be brought to Mandos. It is summoned, and the summons proceeds from just authority, and is imperative. Yet it may be refused. Among those who refused the summons of the Valar to Aman in the first year of the Elves, refusal of the summon to Mandos and the halls of waiting is the elders say frequent." So it was less frequent, however, in the ancient days while Morgoth was still in Arda, or his servant Sauron after him, for then the Fëa unbodied would flee in terror of the shadow to any refuge, unless it were already committed to the darkness and passed then into its dominion. In like manner, even of the Eldar, some who had become corrupted refused the summons, and then had little power to resist the counter-summons of Morgoth. So what that means is, in the ancient days, in the First Age, pre-First Age, when Morgoth was in the world, Sauron was there as well, and they were fucking things up. Elves very, very rarely refused the call to Mandos. Even Fëanor, when he died, went straight to Mandos, because the alternative was going to Morgoth, who would use you and fuck you up. And if you went to Sauron, he'd probably turn you into a fucking werewolf or something, because you remember that's how werewolves were born, is they put evil spirits into big wolf bodies. So while it's confusingly worded there, but it just, in the ancient days, the elves rarely ever refused the call to Mandos. But you could refuse the call to Mandos, but they just rarely did because the alternative was horrible. But then he goes on to say, "But it would seem that in these after days, more and more of the elves, be they of the Eldali in origin, or be they of other kinds who linger in Middle-earth, now refuse the summons of Mandos and wander houseless in the world, unwilling to leave it and unable to inhabit it. haunting trees or springs or hidden places that they once knew. Not all of these are kindly or unstained by the shadow. Indeed, the refusal of the summons is in itself a sign of taint. So what Tolkien's saying here now is that as time went on, and basically the longer you stayed in Middle-earth, the less likely you were to ever go to Aman, the less likely you ever were to go west. And some elves, a lot of elves it sounds like, just stuck around right till, well, still now. And I think this could be a very good explanation of like haunted places. This is where we could get our idea of haunted places from, because they're elvish spirits that would never leave, and they clung to everything they knew. And because we knew eventually elves would kind of like disappear, and their bodies, their bodies would fade, but their spirits would stay. And that's where we get haunted places, haunted woods, haunted forests, haunted houses, even haunted place like fucking Indian burial ground type shit. So Tolkien's explicitly stating that even the act of refusing the call to go to Mandos is a sign that there's something ain't quite right with you, as Hank Hill would say. But it's also mentioned here that even the elves who weren't the Avari, so like there might even be some elves who went to Aman, came back to Middle-earth, and then never left and became, God forbid, what if one of his precious Caliquendi became evil? Who knows? But the important thing to take away here is that there were definitely evil elves, which is a fascinating concept in itself. But what's even more fascinating is that these houseless, i.e. you don't have a body means you're houseless, these houseless elves wandered the earth, would sometimes try to possess people. So now mixed into this conversation we're having about necromancy and evil spirits, we have possession, which is pretty fucking hardcore. So the Valar specifically forbade the living to speak with the dead, because it was so profane and unholy, which sounds very close to the Bible that we talked about at the beginning. So only Mandos should commune with the dead, because that was his job, and they may need healing, they may need re-education, or whatever they needed or deserved before they were ready to move on or be reborn in the case of the elves. There's also a big distinction here to be made that only Mandos, Eru, and Manwë were like the three ones who would decide if an elf would be reborn. And the elf deciding to take matters into their own hands and try to take a body for themselves was, I think, probably a cardinal sin as far as being an elf goes. So there's actually more to this than I thought ever. And I first had this conversation, like a year ago maybe. I first had it with Amanda and Alex together. We talked a lot about evil elves and possession and what have you. And I remember just how surprised we were to find out that he'd wrote about it. So let's read about possession specifically. So our boy Sauron gets a good shout out here when we're talking about it, but we'll get a glimpse into how possession works, and that gives a little bit of an indication of how necromancy might work as well. So it's therefore a foolish and perilous thing, besides being a wrong deed forbidden justly by the appointed rulers of Arda, if the living seek to commune with the unbodied, though the houseless may desire it, especially the most unworthy among them. For the unbodied wandering in the world are those who at least have refused the door of life and remain in regret and self-pity. Some are filled with bitterness, grievance, and envy. Some were enslaved by the Dark Lord and do his work still, though he himself is gone. They will not speak truth or wisdom. To call on them is folly. To attempt to master them and to make them servants of one's own will is wickedness. Such practices are of Morgoth, and the necromancers of the host of Sauron his servant. Some say that the houseless desire bodies, though they are not willing to seek them lawfully by submission to the judgment of Mandos. The wicked among them will take bodies if they can unlawfully. The peril of communing with them, therefore, not only the peril of being deluded by fantasies or lies, there is peril also of destruction. For one of the hungry houseless, if it is admitted to the friendship of the living, may seek to eject the feyer from its body, and in the contest for mastery the body may be gravely injured, even if he not wrested from its rightful inhabitant. habitant, or the houseless may plead for shelter, and if it is admitted, then it will seek to enslave its host and use both his will and his body for its own purposes. It is said that Sauron did these things and taught his followers how to achieve them. That is fucking spooky. Being befriended by an elf or a spirit you can't see, being deceived by them, being lied to, being told all these fantasies, being asked, please, I need a place to stay, please, it's so cold out here, can I just, baby, it's cold outside. And then when you let them in, they try and throw your fucking soul out of your body. And to top it all off, this is so traumatic that it could even kill you. That to have your soul, to fight for control of your soul within your own body will damage your body, might gravely injure you, or it might actually kill you. What the fuck? So now we have a good grasp, right? I think I've ran you through a beginner's course to necromancy, right? We've got a good grasp on the evil spirits. Let's have a look at the great necromancer Sauron, right? He must have got up to loads of necromantic shit, right? He must have been crazy about it. So in earlier versions, he was the necromancer Thu. He was specifically the necromancer Thu. And he was also the Prince of Cats, Tevildo. Sauron had many names, but we'll save that for another day. We're interested in his necromancy today. And unfortunately, Tevildo, the Prince of Cats, didn't have thumbs, so he didn't do much necromanting. But let's have a look at Thu. Because in one of the best poems ever written, The Lay of Leithian, we get some mentions of Thu the necromancer. And I'd like to read a short passage that gives some colour to the types of things that the necromancer was involved in. Men called him Thu, and as a god, in after days beneath his rod, bewildered bowed to him and made his ghastly temples in the shade. Not yet my men enthralled adored, now was he Morgoth's mightiest lord. Master of wolves whose shivering howl forever echoed in the hills and foul, enchantments and dark sigildry did weave and wield in glamoury, that necromancer held his hosts, of phantoms and of wandering ghosts, of misbegotten or spell-wronged, monsters that about him thronged, working his bidding dark and vile, the werewolves of the Wizard's Isle. So that was pretty cool. Like that gives you a very gothic horror, fantasy horror, like fucking Strad von Zarovich D&D type. That gives you a very cool impression of like a dark tower with a fucking moon in the background, wolves howling, vampire bats fighting. An episode, just the Scooby-Doo title, the old Scooby-Doo cartoon, the intro to that basically. So to go through Sauron's life and deeds is a big episode by itself, maybe even a series, so we're not going to do that here. I'll save that for another time. But we're specifically going to look at his actions as the necromancer in Tolkien's works. So he's called the necromancer. He was called Thu the necromancer. He has given it biggins about, we know what necromancy is. We know that he does it all. So all of the necromancy that Sauron got up to, right? Wrong. In the story of The Hobbit, and in the story of Lord of the Rings, Sauron never actually uses necromancy. We never see him do anything necromancy related. It's not according to the definitions that Tolkien gave us of controlling and compelling evil spirits. Sauron is, so it's just a big wet fart. Like, it's all fart, no shit. I've got nothing for you, I'm afraid. Sauron, like, we get one line in like an essay where Tolkien writes about him doing necromancy and teaching it to his followers and what have you, but we don't actually see him do anything. I think maybe it might qualify when you come to the creation of werewolves, that he puts evil spirits into the werewolves, but that's in the Silmarillion. That's not in the big stories. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, for someone who's called the necromancer, we don't see him do an awful lot of anything. Well, yeah, sorry. I mean, I've given you a good understanding of what necromancy is in Tolkien, but I can only do the best with the material that's given to me. But funnily enough, Sauron became the necromancer as a way for Tolkien to link the Hobbit to the wider world that he was building. And this is a little bit where it gets a little bit complex, because Sauron was always the necromancer in the Hobbit, because it was a way that like it was to give the impression of depth. So the necromancer was always Sauron, but it wasn't always the canon version of Sauron, like the chronological version of Sauron. Like apparently he only really sat down and kind of worked out the timelines for everything once he decided to link The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And it was always like a bizarro version of Sauron, like, oh, this is one of the things he could have got up to. Do you know, like in like a cartoon, like a cartoon where you've got to reset everything by the end of the week, so by the end of the episode, so that you're ready to do it again next week. So that in that way, you'll have cartoons that run for 30, 40 years, like The Simpsons, but they never age. But all of these things have always happened, and there's no kind of like definitive canon of events. It was like that with Sauron. Like he was always the necromancer, but he wasn't always the Sauron. Like Sauron was always the necromancer, but he wasn't like the canon Sauron, because that canon Sauron didn't really exist until Lord of the Rings was being put pen to paper and everything was being worked out from a timeline point of view. And it only really solidified with the Tale of Years when it started to write about what the fuck Sauron had been up to. So it was interesting though, and it was because, you know, when it came to merging the two worlds, that Sauron was the antagonist, and they needed to account for his long absence at the end of the Second Age. So he was determined to have been gathering power in Mirkwood. So rather than it just being like a cutaway fantasy of what Sauron might have been up to, it became the definitive version of this is what he was doing. This is the necromancer. This is the Sauron. So yeah, I mean, with him not being very kind of necromancy here, in the earlier versions of the story, we do see that Thu was overtly magical, because in earlier versions, Thu the necromancer was said to have learned black magic from Morgoth himself and came to Middle-earth to rule as a wizard king. And then in another version, he was Lord of the Isle of Werewolves, which, you know, he was, Tolkien Gowroth, where he commanded a host of phantoms who did his evil bidding, and he was worshipped by some humans. So it's kind of, yeah, it's all kind of similar. So we're getting towards the end now. It's been an interesting one for me. I mean, I hope you found this as interesting as I have. To cover actual evil elves, to find out that the necromancer doesn't do much necromanting, unless he's, you know, into that. I'm proud of myself. I went 53 minutes without making a necrophiliac joke. So we'll talk about the etymologies. If we go to Quenya, the Noldor are called that because the Quenya word nole, long study of any subject, or nole, or nol, law, knowledge, right? So that's why the Noldor are called that, is like the people who study. So the Noldor are the law masters, and I've covered them before, blah, 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 blah. However, the cognate, or related word for this term, is the same in Sindarin and in the Black Speech, and that word is gul, as in Nazgul, Dol Guldur. So in Sindarin, gul originally referred to secret knowledge, arts, or the deeper knowledge of the wise or skilled persons. However, over the course of a very long time, the word came to be associated with Morgoth's black arts, as in Morgul, you know, compounded Morgul. So therefore, we will always find the Sindarin and Black Speech word ghoul specifically referring to evil or perverted knowledge, or necromancy, or sorcery. So the same word that the Quenya that in Quenya the Noldor get their name from is the related term in Sindarin, is where the word necromancy comes from. But that's all I've really got for you today. Is a dive into necromancy in the world of Tolkien. It was a bit of a wet fart in some aspects, but utterly fascinating in others. That the idea of evil spirits being controlled, like where do evil spirits come from? Let's have a look at some of the notable evil spirits. I think from that point of view, it's absolutely fascinating. And the idea, actually, do you know what? Could you imagine how much of a horror story Lord of the Rings would be if the Barrow-wights had like Frodo before Tom, like Frodo and the other hobbits, like before Tom Bombadil got to them, they had to fight off the Barrow-wights from possessing their bodies, and then Tom finds them all like fucking fucked up, like bruised and bloodied and shit, because the fight's been going on internally, but they're actually like outwardly like being ripped apart because of it. Okay, I can understand why Tolkien might not have wrote too much about it. And of course, there's that earlier draft of Lord of the Rings where the Witch King of Angmar does like a 3-day ceremony, a ritual to wake up the Barrow Wight, which I guess that would be the clearest act of necromancy, probably. But yeah, the actual term necromancy as well, I was very surprised to find out the history behind that, and the actual origin of the term doesn't quite match up to our understanding of it now, which is just blows your fucking mind. But yeah, no, that was necromancy. That was evil elves. That was a bit of esoteric magic history in the real world. That was a bit of everything, that one. So yeah, like I said, this let me know what you thought. Let me know what type of magic you want to see me do next, because or if there's any type of magic you think I might have overlooked. But yeah, next few episodes we are going to be looking around magic. But if there's anything you want to see covered on the podcast, get in touch. I love hearing from you. We've got the community's growing. Don't get me wrong; it's growing quite quickly now. I think we've reached a weird point where there's more people who listen and talk to me regularly than I can. Like, I'm having to get to the point where I'm having to choose who I can respond to in like a given day. So like when you message me, it might take me a while to get back to you sometimes because like there's people who get in touch quite a lot, which I think is absolutely lovely. Like we get so much love on the pod in the community, which is fantastic. Other than that, just kind of want to reiterate that a few people have asked me, but I won't be covering Rings of Power on the podcast. I might make a passing reference to it here and there. It's just not something I think is feasible because there's too much to unpick, and the discourse around it online is not great for just for general discussion. Like we keep chill vibes on this podcast a lot of the time. So yeah, if you enjoy it, enjoy it. If you don't. I personally don't care for it as a Tolkien adaptation, but I watch it as a generic fantasy show. When I've watched it as a generic fantasy show, it's made it infinitely more enjoyable for me. So that's that. More power to every. Wherever you stand on it. There's assholes on all sides of everything. But yeah, so we won't be covering really on the podcast. We'll obviously cover a lot of the topics that come up as that because it's unavoidable. But yeah, that's just one of the more common questions I get. So if you listen this far, then, well, obviously you should be. I mean, who listens to 30 minutes of me and then turns me off? Unless you're a big hardcore Becca fan, of which there is a lot. So yeah, you might have just thought it was a solo episode and like, fuck this. Right, anyway, I am rambling. Look out in a couple of weeks for the next episode. In the meantime, get in touch if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about. And other than that, I will catch you soon. Have a fantastic day where you are. Bye.